Hey everyone, you're tuned into InfoQuench with Jeff.
And Amy. Join us as we talk about anything.
And everything.
All the stuff that makes life interesting.
So let's get to it. Hey everybody, and welcome to InfoQuench. I'm your host, Jeff.
And I'm Amy, and this episode we're going to be talking about sayings or terms that are considered offensive to some, and you may not realize that they're offensive. So this is something I was interested in educating myself on. Just learning, I guess, more about, the inherent prejudice that we may have in general, but also what's in our, our everyday vernacular, the sayings that we're using, the
things that you wouldn't really know that would be offensive because you've been saying them so long. Because a lot of these sayings, I would presume, have been passed down from generation to generation.
Well, I think a lot of times we do say things without realizing where the origins are.
No.
And it's, not with ill intent, but I think we've learned as a society in the last, I guess more so in the last year with the Black Lives Matter movement, how important it is for us to continue to learn and to educate ourselves on how to be better.
It's something that we can always learn from, no matter how old we get.
That's right. We can always learn more. And it's important to realize that even if something isn't offensive to you, if it's considered offensive to somebody else, that's reason enough to, just change your language. There's enough, choice out there, enough words in the English language that you can choose a synonym or some other way of conveying your thoughts or feelings without offending somebody. So if that's available to you, why not? But I think the first step is sort of identifying what are those sort of terms, sayings that are offensive, or what are the origins of them. Yeah.
Did you hear the cat? Charlie, he's saying offensive things in the background here. What do you want?
It's never fail. I haven't seen him all day, and here he is.
Here he is
now.
I think he wants to do his own podcast.
Wouldn't that be fascinating? I'm not a cat.
In the house with Charlie.
That's what it would just be, I'm not a cat.
Today,
the whole podcast.
I'm not a cat.
I had to repeat it because I'm like, you're not picking up when I'm laying down.
That's hilarious.
For those who missed it, there's a YouTube video circulating around I'm not a cat. And if you're listening to this in the future,
a lawyer talking to a judge.
It will still be on YouTube and you can still look it up.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. Okay, so let's, I guess, get on with this.
Let's get on with it.
One thing I would like to also mention is we're recording this on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Happy Valentine's Day. But it's also, February is Black History Month. I think it is in Canada for sure, and I think across North America and perhaps in other countries as well. And so, just a time to celebrate the contributions and achievements of the Black community.
Yes.
So I just wanted to recognize that too.
Black History Month.
So let's get started. And I would encourage people, I'm going to cover these. I did research and tried to find a few different sources for each of the items. But if you want to know more, Google up these terms and read the full history of them.
I did more research than you, though, this time. Let's be honest.
You say that with a straight face.
Yeah, no.
Not really. You're smirking.
Okay.
The first one is master bedroom.
Right? Master bedroom. Yeah, I can see how that one would be problematic.
Well, but
people say it all the time. They say it on Property, whatever the show is there.
Every show on HGTV.
What's her name? The one that was really kind of...
Sandra on Property Hunters?
Sandra.
Or Property Virgins?
That is what I'm thinking about, yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a common term. And because we're putting it in the context of discussing offensive sayings or terminology, straight away when you hear it, you think, oh, okay, I could see how that would be offensive. Yeah. But other than that, I think people would use it quite often.
What did you find out about origins for that one?
So according to a CNN article... just for reference, about 42% of the current property listings on U.S. Zillow. There was a great SNL skit on Zillow recently. So almost half of the listings use the term master in reference to the main bathroom or bath. And according to the real estate get out of here, Charlie. We always promise the unedited version of our podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Charlie will make a reappearance.
Yeah.
Despite Jeff's frantic shooing away.
There you go. He'll be back.
According to a real estate blog, Trelora, the phrase master bedroom first appeared in a 1926 Sears catalog. So I had no idea that Sears catalogs even
1926.
advertised properties, but apparently they did back then. There was a Dutch colonial home, and it was the most expensive in the catalog, and it referred to a large second bedroom with a private bath, which I think is what most people refer to now as master bedrooms. And it became more widely implemented as a term in North America after World War II, and it was the intent was to give parents a private space within their own homes where they had both a bedroom and a bathroom.
Right.
So even though it's unclear whether the roots have, or whether the term has roots in American slavery, it does evoke that history, that idea of separation.
Yeah.
And so much so that a lot of real estate associations are making the move to replace master with primary to describe
sense.
bedrooms and bathrooms in their listings.
I think it also echoes the patriarchy as well. You know, like the master bedroom.
That's a
like,
good point.
You know,
I didn't even read
Yeah.
anything on that, but that's another...
makes sense in a way. You know, interesting.
I came across a lot of articles just specifically around the idea of black and white. So the idea of blacklisting somebody or whitelisting, like even when we have, say, an email address that's considered safe in the IT world, they'll call it's whitelisted.
Wild. I never
People
really thought of
are
that.
blackballed, or they have a black mark against them, or they're considered black sheep. So all of those things, even though they don't have a direct link to race, they reinforce the incorrect notion of black equaling bad and
Right.
white equaling good. And when you think about that and how ingrained that is in so much of our...
It's segregating negative and
culture.
positive things with a racial color, which is very
Right.
interesting, like very odd, you know?
It is. I found that one fascinating because that's so prevalent in our language.
That one is fascinating. I never really thought of that one before, you know?
This one really surprised me. And I should say that I think most of these on the list they surprised me. I didn't know. A lot of they're terms that I use regularly, and I had no idea where the origins were, that they could be considered offensive to some. The next one's urban.
Urban, yeah.
So-
Urban planning, urban development.
Well, that's right. So it's often used to refer to the inner city, and there's a lot of articles out there, a lot of research that's been done around the racialization of space. So attributing certain races or socioeconomic status to certain areas.
Yeah.
So today, a lot of people are using alternatives and just saying either city or metropolitan area or environment. And so much so that instead of using urban to categorize music made by black artists, many are now categorizing it as either hip-hop or R&B.
That makes sense for sure.
So National Public Radio's Kate Young noted that on June 5th, in response to so this was just June 5th of 2020, in response to the rapidly increasing momentum behind the fight for Black lives in the United States and around the world, Republic Records announced that it would remove urban from the label's verbiage
Yeah, that's interesting.
in describing departments, employee titles, and music genres.
It's interesting because, as an aside from that, I know that when I was a kid and interested in breakdancing, we used what was called a ghetto blaster.
Well, yes, that's
And-
another term that I had come across, which actually
is
has...
it on your list? I
no,
apologize.
it isn't, because I thought that
Yeah.
one to me was one I knew, and
Yeah.
I think that's become more widely known as being an inappropriate term. But you're
Yeah.
right, ghetto blaster was a very common term when we were growing up.
That's what those radios were called, unfortunately. But
So just sort of finishing what Miss Young had said, she just said over the time the meanings and connotations of urban have shifted and developed into a generalization of black people in many sectors of the music industry, including employees and music by black artists. So, and according to Forbes, major record labels such as Warner Music Group and even the Grammys and radio stations are moving away from the use of using the category of urban music to support a movement of racial equality in the music industry.
That's really interesting, because music shouldn't be categorized in sort of like an area from which it comes from. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because music can come from anywhere.
Exactly. So it's fascinating. Now, in the research that I read, it very much focused on the music industry. So it'd be interesting. You mentioned like urban planning and that sort of thing, whether it's viewed in the same negative context, depending on the realm that it's being used. The next one, Nitty Gritty.
There's a band called the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Like
well, and I think when we
band.
say nitty gritty, we basically, well, according to the Cambridge English Dictionary, it's the basic facts of a situation. We'll say getting down to the nitty gritty.
Getting down to the nitty gritty, yeah.
But many consider the term to have roots in the slave trade. So, so much so that its use is already banned in a lot of institutions in the U.S., including police forces.
Yeah.
So, theories suggest the expression originated because it referred to the waste matter that was found in the bottom of boats that people were being transported in during the times of the slave trade. And so
would have never thought that.
So what was left over once the people were removed from the hold, were, I guess it was called the nitty gritty. Mm-hmm. Nitty referring to a nit, which is the egg of a louse. So that was, a parasitic insect that was common among the poor conditions that the people were being transported in. And then gritty is a reference to grits, which are commonly eaten in the South, coarse ground grain, and they were used as sort of cheap food to feed people while they were being transported across the Atlantic. It was a cheap way to feed them. So the idea of nitty gritty
would have never known that one.
I had no idea.
It's interesting because, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, for example, is the name of that country group. Like, they're probably more than likely not going to change the name of their band. But if you look at, the Dixie Chicks, they changed their name from Dixie Chicks to just Chicks because they dropped the Dixie, right? So so people are, wising up. I think,
we've got sports teams changing names, and if it's some people might say, I don't find it offensive, and I think you're reading too much into it. But I think when we do that, we're missing the point. Mm-hmm. It's not about what we think.
If it's offensive to at least like even just one person, it should be offensive to you as well. Like, you should care about your fellow human being. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And
there's still so much to learn about this.
There is, and we live in such a racially charged, time right now.
We do, and it's a great time for education.
Yeah, and that's what this info. We're quenching your info.
There you go. I like how you came up with that.
Yeah, just right off the top of my head. Yeah.
The next one I have is Peanut Gallery. Mm-hmm. Now,
Peanut Gallery.
We mentioned this to some friends, and they were aware that it wasn't an offensive term, but I wasn't aware of it. I didn't know.
I don't even know what that word would be used in context. Like,
typically when we say it now, like I guess in like current day,
right.
we talk about it when we're describing like just ill-informed comments. It's often used to describe like
through the
critics
kind of thing?
or hecklers or like comments from the peanut gallery or
okay, I see.
So that's sort of how it's used today, but it dates back to the vaudeville era of the late 19th century, and it referred to sections of the theater where black people typically sat, and because peanuts were sold at these shows, and sometimes people would throw peanuts at unpopular acts, the term evolved to connote unwarranted criticism of the acts.
Wow.
So while the term was more classist, it had racist undertones as well, because the acts themselves during that era were blatantly racist.
Yeah, like Al Jolson.
They would include like blackface. And,
right, yeah. Wow.
So, and just to think about how far back it goes, Jeffrey Barg, who writes a language column for the Philadelphia Inquirer, noted that the first documented use of peanut gallery appeared in a New Orleans newspaper back in 1867. Which is also the year of our country's birthday.
Yes. Wow. Way to put that one all together.
We proudly host our podcast at a St. John, New Brunswick in Canada.
Yeah.
We'll just put that in there. And the term peanut gallery became more common in the 1940s. It was actually used on the radio show for Howdy Doody and later into in their TV version. So that's how it's. I always find the etymology, like the history of words and language
origin,
and how they
yeah.
evolve over time is fascinating anyway, but it does give you insight into these particular terms.
That one in particular is one that I would never really thought to be, what it means. It's most of these, to be honest.
Have you heard of the term cakewalk before?
I don't think I have. To
Okay.
be perfectly honest.
This is something it's usually when you can do something easily, it's a cakewalk.
Oh,
Like,
okay. Yeah, then yes. I
Yeah,
have,
like I got
it,
through that task. It was a
Yeah.
cakewalk. That's how it's used in current day.
Cakewalk.
But it originated as a dance performed by enslaved black people on plantations before the Civil War.
The name of the dance was Cakewalk?
No. So what had happened is, so black people intended it as a way to mock the way that white people danced.
Oh.
But plantation owners often interpreted the movements as unskillful attempts to be like them. So they just completely misinterpreted the intent. And owners of the plantations actually held contests where they would watch the enslaved people compete, and they would offer cake as a prize.
Oh.
So it became called the cakewalk.
Right. But it's interesting
became
that
known
they
as a
called it a
cakewalk.
walk and not a dance. If they were.
Well, I guess because they were, it was like a dance, but they were trying to
Okay.
mimic the
I
way
see.
that white people walked.
Right. So it's
moved.
like it's pure uncut exploitation is where that word comes from.
That yes, and I read that one in a few different sources, and I was surprised. Fuzzy Wuzzy,
Fuzzy Wuzzy. There's that
a
saying.
nursery rhyme,
Yeah.
right? So
Was
yeah,
a bear.
Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear. It's
Yeah.
actually so.
Fuzzy.
It later became a nursery rhyme, but it originated as a racist term used by British soldiers in the 1800s in relation to black people in Africa, and they used it as a stereotype because of hair texture.
Really?
It was also used, in Australia and Papua New Guinea. So it was. Used
So I wonder
in
how it
different-
originated to a nursery rhyme.
Well, then, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, but you'll know how to say it. Rudyard.
Rudyard Kipling.
Exactly. I knew you would know how to say it.
Yeah.
Jeff's the literature
Not necessarily,
guru in the
but
relationship.
I just know
I'm
how
not.
to pronounce Rudyard Kipling. That's it.
He wrote a poem that was around that terminology, and then it later became that made it more popular, and it later got changed or put into a nursery rhyme.
So he wrote it with the racist connotation, like he was.
I don't know
wrote
the
it
whole
from a
history
racist-
of the
okay,
poem, but I know
sorry.
that was sort of like he that's
Yeah.
where he used the term.
Okay, I see.
I don't know if he explained it or not, but that's something to research. Like
Well,
if he explained
yeah.
the whole background of it, but likely given the time frame. This next one is hysterical.
The word hysterical.
The word hysterical. And we often say it when something's really funny, I think, or,
Yeah, I'm really.
my
uncontrolled
uncontrolled laughter
curiosity
or
is
emotion.
piqued with this one.
But it's been historically used to reference women. It actually comes from the Greek word for womb. And it was once believed that hysteria was a disorder only suffered by women and caused by disturbances in the uterus.
What?
So just a bunch of
That's really interesting.
crap.
Yeah, I know. I do believe the hairband Def Leppard had an album called Hysteria.
hysteria. You're right.
So I wonder if they were.
What did you call them? A hair band?
Hairband? Like they just had like hair that defied gravity, from the '80s. So
Is that a common term, or you just make that up?
No, I've heard it before. I didn't
Oh.
make. I just didn't. I certainly didn't just make that up. No, but it's like Poison and Skid Row, all those, hair-defying bands from the '80s.
Oh, wow. I just thought a hairband was something I put in my hair to keep the hair out of my face.
It probably is that too, honey.
I guess I've just learned something. Hopefully, you've learned something as well. Don't call me hysterical. But no, it is maybe that one lesser known, but definitely aimed predominantly at women.
I wonder if it
when
has
that
connotations to hysterectomy as well.
Well, I bet you when I say the Greek word for womb, I bet
Yeah.
it's the hyst.
Yeah, hyst.
Yes.
Interesting.
Well done. See,
We're making connections.
making connections. This one is one that I use commonly in discussing contracts, and it's called a grandfather clause, or to be grandfathered in.
Yes, I understand.
So it means usually, if somebody is following existing rules or laws, they can continue to follow those even
Right.
after a new rule or law has been passed. So they call it being grandfathered in, or having
Yes.
a grandfather clause in a contract. So this one has a very definitive racist connotation, or
Really?
I shouldn't say connotation. It has a origin specifically to do with the times of slavery in the United States. So America's 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote in 1870, but several states erected institutional barriers to basically complicate the whole process for them. So some of the examples are they had expensive poll taxes and literacy tests that
Right,
made it
that they-
really difficult for black men to cast their votes at the time. But because the same law would prevent some white men from voting too, because they would have the same issues with the poll taxes and literacy tests,
Yes.
the states went around this by passing what's known as the grandfather clause, stipulating
What?
that you could vote before if you could vote before the 15th Amendment, meaning you were white, because that was all who could vote before that, or were the lineal descent of a voter. So, for instance, you had a grandfather who
Wow.
likely also meaning you are white, you didn't have to take tests or pay the toll tax. So in other words, you were grandfathered into being allowed to vote.
That's astonishing. So,
I know, that one really
Yeah, that one.
was a surprising one to me.
That is extreme exploitative. Like, that's just, yeah.
This-
Disregarding votes and people.
This next one, hip hip hooray.
Yeah.
So it's believed to have anti-Semitic connotations, and the reason being is that it's related to the Germans basically using a cheer, hep hep, HEP,
Yeah.
hep hep, which was a German herding call, and they would use this as they were forcing Jews from their home across Europe during the 19th century.
Wow.
So, though others believe the term didn't originate as a racist phrase from the beginning, but instead evolved to have racist usage, it's still something that does cause offense to...
It's so ironic that it's used to celebrate things.
Well, I know. So the hooray part is just thought to be a variation of hurrah, which is like a sailor's
Yes.
shout of excitement. So there really isn't anything around that. So it's really the hip hip
Yeah.
and the idea that it comes from the Germans calling hep hep, which you can imagine if you were somebody of Jewish descent or anybody whose family endured that would be quite a horrible association.
I
with
wonder
that
what
particular-
HEP, like HEP,
means in German.
yeah, like, or what the connotation is there, because I know that
Well,
there's
it's a
HEP
German
cats.
herding call, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know German.
No, there's like HEP cats, right? And that just means somebody in the know for jazz music and, beatnik culture or whatever. But I don't think it has any connotation with that. But
Okay.
it's interesting.
Well, and so the article that I'd read around this said just to avoid offending people, just say hooray.
Hooray.
Avoid those first two words.
Yeah.
Again, just erring on the side of caution, not to upset anybody. The next one is uppity.
Uppity.
Yeah. So this is something.
I would not know that was problematic either.
So the Atlantic reports that during segregation times, racist Southerners would use uppity to describe black people who they thought didn't know their place, and I'm using air quotes here,
Right.
socioeconomically speaking. So it's thought that the term started with the black community, but racists adopted it really quickly. And in fact, as recently 2011, Rush Limbaugh pontificated that a NASCAR audience booed Michelle Obama because she exhibited uppity-ism.
Really?
Yes.
He's so evil, Rush Limbaugh. He's just an awful, right-wing pundit radio host that and Trump gave him like the Medal of Honor or whatever the heck it is. Anyways.
This next one I knew, and I think you may know it, but gyp or gypped.
Yes, I do.
So
know
it
about
usually
this
means
one.
when you feel like you've been ripped off, I guess. But it originates from the term gypsy.
Yes.
which is an ethnic Roma people that were thought to originate from Egypt and who lived throughout Europe and America. And they typically traveled a lot, and they made their money by selling things. But naturally, because of all the transactions, business disputes would come up, and the masses started thinking of them as swindlers. So gyp has become synonymous with cheating somebody.
Wow, I know that's maybe something that was said when we were kids and stuff, but you don't a lot of you don't say those things any longer. Who knew? Like, I just wanted to say one other thing that I thought about just as we were talking is another thing that you don't really hear much about is like when someone is termed like an illegal alien. You never really think of that's not a very good term to call somebody from another country that's trying to get into
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot behind that.
I just don't know why they're called illegal aliens of all things. Like, I know they're alien to the country they're trying to get into,
Right.
on a...
Well, and
anyway.
I guess the term, alienated and...
Yeah. It's just, I think they're trying
Is
to
that
change
just like...
that one as well.
Oh, yes?
I think so, yeah.
Did you research that, Jeff? Or
I didn't research
is that
it, but
just
I
your
do...
gut telling you?
I do remember reading something about that recently.
Okay.
I don't do research, you know that.
This next one, I'm definitely have been guilty of using. Long time no see, or
Yeah.
no can do.
Yeah.
So the idea is that it's making fun of people who have English as a second language or learning to speak English.
Yeah.
More specifically, it was used by British and American navies who picked it up through their interactions in the Far East with people who were speaking a simplified version of English.
Huh.
And there's other stories that point to, in Western novels that cite interactions with indigenous people. So, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, this type of isolating construction would have been unusual for the indigenous languages of North America. So the idea that it's not even something that they would have done, but it was an association
Right.
that people made. And by the 1920s, it became very popular that no matter what the origin of it was still considered to be mocking people who were learning English.
Well, that's really interesting because we were just listening to a record today by Hall & Oates, and they have a lyric that says, "I can't go for that, no can do."
Oh.
So, I wonder if they're aware of the connotation of that.
Next one's Paddy Wagon.
Interesting.
So Paddy, well, my granddad, his name was Patrick, and we called him Paddy.
Right.
And it's a common name for somebody named Patrick in Ireland, and wagon refers to a vehicle. So there's two thoughts on this, on whether it's referring to groups of police officers that were primarily of Irish descent, or whether it's referring to the Irish being commonly arrested for being rowdy. And either way, it's considered to be derogatory in terms of, people who are Irish and using that term paddy wagon. But in modern slang, it's just used when you're talking about a police car.
Right. With the one that rounds up drunk people, though, pretty much. That's what paddy wagon does.
Right.
Rule
of thumb.
Rule of thumb.
This is another one with some controversy.
Mm-hmm.
So just quickly, a rule of thumb is like a basic rule. You're like, that by rule of thumb, this is what you do.
Basic knowledge.
According to the Telegraph, it dates back to 1886, where Sir Francis Buller ruled that a man could beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb.
What?
Hence the rule of thumb.
What?
But American author William Safire disputed the story, writing in the New York Times that it actually comes from as far back as 1692, and it was basically Sir William Hope wrote in The Complete Fencing Master, "What he doth by rule of thumb and not by art." So just
So it's a fencing term? Is that
a
what
fencing, yes,
Ah.
The Complete
Wow.
Fencing Master.
That first one is just horrible.
Well, it's a great example of sometimes there's controversy over the origin of words and whether or not they're truly offensive in nature, depending on where they come from. But again, I don't think we can say it enough. If you can err on the side of caution, watch what you say, learn as we go along, and do the research and find out more about the terms. I
learned a lot from this one. And you know what? I will say that this podcast went by rather quickly.
It did.
It did. And I hope you enjoyed this podcast, learned something. Check us out anywhere on any audio format.
Anywhere you get your podcast, you'll find us.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.
And remember, you can catch up on past episodes at InfoQuench.com.
Or just about anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
And help spread the word about InfoQuench.
Till next time.